Hello, 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 ladies and gentlemen. You are listening to the Westcliffe Climb. I'm Pastor Joshua Duffy. Glad to be back with you. I've been out of town just for a smidge. Um, so it's good to be back. Sorry for those of you that I've missed out on. I know a few of you reached out to me about what was the deal. Ended up going out of town and wasn't something we're necessarily expecting. I had invested in a trip roughly, my goodness, almost 3 years ago, and had to put it off due to COVID. And I pushed it off every 6 months. I have to move it out another 6 months, move it out another 6 months because I did not want to risk being stranded upon testing positive in another country. So I kept pushing it out, booked it in 19. And before I could push the trip out another 6 months, literally 10 days before our most recently updated itinerary schedule went out, the United States dropped any and all restrictions on pre-boarding departure from out of the country back into the United States, which is another way of saying all of my excuses were gone. So at that point, I had to get my act together. This particular country said, hey, we've put this off for more than 2 years for you. You can either now take advantage of what you have given us money for or by the end of August, or you will lose everything. And so we very quickly had to pull together a trip. It was out of town. It was fantastic. It was to a certain degree spontaneous, which I love, which my wife did not. But once we got there, we had a blast. So while I'm in another country, I am gone no more than 4 days. And then I discover that Roe v. Wade is flipped upside down on its ear, creating no shortage, I'm quite certain, of chaos here in the United States. And then a firestorm of debate, of course, across the country and the world. Now, granted, what the discussion really is pushing it back to the states. So here's just some thoughts, and I'm gonna dig into this deeper this Sunday at my church, Pilgrim Lutheran Church, as we tied into the story of Esther. We're closing out the series on Esther, and so we're gonna dive into this as well. But this is, this is kind of strange to me, and maybe if I'm being a little judgy, forgive me, okay? If I'm coming across judgy here in a moment. Because I know the gap of my understanding and all understanding is motive. So I want to try my best not to ascribe motive to what I'm seeing. It's just kind of a gut like feeling that I have, and maybe you feel it too. Maybe I'm off. I don't know. Okay. I'm a guy talking in front of a green screen. That's it. It feels like something that pastors and Christians should be elated. It feels like even when something like this, that's pretty amazing, just happened, we I don't know. It's almost like it feels like we're almost halfway apologizing for it, or I don't know what that is. It's the only way I can seem to put it into words. We're like cautiously thankful. I don't know what it is. It's a bizarre thing in our culture. And I don't know if that's because the Christian church or Christians are more and more divided on this issue. I don't know why we're divided on that issue. I understand intellectually why we are, but as followers of Jesus, I don't quite understand why we aren't all on the same page on this particular issue. So, it's fascinating to me. We're going into the 4th of July, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So I just thought I would just kind of pass on some thoughts here. Some of them may be highly offensive to you and may cause you to unfollow Westcliffe forever, or quite possibly draw you in, or maybe just cause you to think, listen, and if you think differently than me, there's no judgment there. I'm not looking to get into arguments or fights. I think we've had enough of that. And we'll probably have a fair dose of it all the more coming in our future. I just think that maybe these are some things worth considering. Okay. Um, you know, I don't always know. I know we talk a lot about the separation of church and state. In my view, that has most certainly been abused for what it was meant to be about, which is keeping me from, you know, in some way, shape, or form, being able to impose some other way of life on some other person, or deny them some kind of goods and services, or treat them differently based on their religious affiliation. The separation of church and state, I mean, loosely said, is that's the heart of what we're talking about. But that was never meant to push God out of the conversation. Um, and and I think just on a baseline level, for some reason, we have conceded that. I mean, that's so ingrained in all of our brains, the separation of church and state, that it's actually evolved into, we don't bring God into the conversation of our governance and government at all. That's worked its way into the psyche of so many of our people on all sides of this issue, that, like, oh, we can't go there, and Jesus didn't come to set up an earthly kingdom, but he came to set up a heavenly one. And no doubt the one that he came into, whenever he, his feet hit the ground here on this earth, no doubt was a, pagan Greco-Roman religion, and he didn't necessarily undermine that, so on and so forth. But, like, if you really stop and think about it, that goes all the way back to, like, the story of Saul, when everyone chose Saul because he was taller than everybody and good looking. At that point, they said, we want an earthly leader. And the people are warned. You realize you're going to get taxed to death. You're going to get treated differently. You're going to go to wars you don't want to go to, and a government's going to take all your stuff. And they still wanted it, and even when you think about Jesus standing next to Jesus, we forget that Jesus Barabbas, Jesus Barabba, which is Jesus, son of Father. That's Barabbas. And he's standing next to Jesus, the son of the Father, right? I mean, there was, like, the last chance yet again for people in an earthly context to choose the right person as their leader. And even then they don't, So I think the whole idea of governments being secular, and governments being kind of standing in opposition to God. I understand the separation of church and state. I don't know that God has any issue at all with being preeminent and at the very top of our priorities and conversation when it comes to our governments. I don't think he's as good as we may think to have him not a part of the conversation of our country and our government and our governance and civil matters. I think we've allowed it to turn into that. And I think that only kind of confuses the discussion, honestly. And the reason I say that is because, really, I think the pushback that you're up against, whether you realize this or not as a Christian, is less about the separation of church and state and the government. But what happens when the state begins to disciple the church? What happens when the state begins to sign off on and begins to align itself with other movements that begin to function as religions themselves? And you just don't notice it because it's not explicitly packaged as a religion. But if you really think about it, it really does. It's functioning as a religion. There are movements happening. We're in Pride Month right now. There's an outreach and evangelism side to that particular movement. There's a desire to go after kids and pull them into the movement, teaching them young. Right? I mean, so far, what have I said so far that's that much different than the church that you go to? Right? There is atonement for past sins. We've been seeing that play itself out in culture over and over again. Um, and I think the reason why you have and this may be terribly unpopular, but I think like you look at how in this kind of cultural religion, okay, that has atonement for sins. Only you, the listener, you're going to atone for the past sins because the Godhead of that religion, kind of the government religion, they're not going to die for you and they're not going to take the hit for you. They're going to blame you. And it's your job then to pay for the sins of the past. Okay. Um, and there's faith statements that we're all called to make as well along the way. And so it really does, in my view, it functions very much like a religion, a lot less like a government. And so that's kind of like the baseline level of some of the craziness that's happening around us that impacts the way I think a Christian can even think about this whole situation, you know? And so, when I look at this, it's sort of like, hey, this is sort of like, almost like the sacrament being protected. I'm looking at the reaction culturally, and it's sort of like if you tried to tell pastors, like, you're not allowed to practice communion any longer. It's the true body and true blood of the unborn. You look at all the rioting that's happened over the last 2 years, right? And you won't find a Planned Parenthood that got so much as a scratch through this whole thing. But police stations, churches, civic centers, whatever, they went up in flames or were vandalized pretty badly. So, like, you think about this whole thing surrounding the unborn, is quite, it goes to the core and the center of kind of this cultural belief and kind of this cultural religion. So, that's really my view, number one, of a big aspect of it. And one of the most fascinating things to me, as again, I was getting caught up on the story and all the happenings and the debating going on, is really for the last several months. If you really go back, we haven't been able to, we haven't been able to define a baby really now for like 50 years, right? At first we weren't clear where they were at developmentally 50 years ago, and then as science kind of got caught up, we went, oh, okay, wait a minute, this is more what's going on inside of a child before they're born. So then we came up with other names rather than calling it a baby, right? Because we'd rather dehumanize it just a smidge, right? And then as we got to a place where we can't really define when it actually had life, because it's no more than a year ago, maybe 6 months ago, right? Like New York legislation comes out that basically says, hey, or an attempt at New York legislation that a baby that is going to be aborted and it's unsuccessful, that child can die on the operating table after being born. So we haven't been able to define that aspect of it culturally, if you think about it. We haven't been able to define, as of last month, what a woman is, right? We can't really even define America. We can't define what is an American. We can't even define life right now. So what's interesting is then when something like this comes down, suddenly we're like crystal clear again on what a woman is. I mean, last month we didn't know what a woman was, and now we know what a woman is again. So like, this is kind of this is the whole bizarre nature of this thing that you're up against as followers of Jesus. That's really only designed to just kind of confuse folks. Like, that's the whole point. That's the whole goal. So I want to impress upon you is really and truly, of all the debates, what Satan really desires is confusion. Satan's all about confusion. God is all about clarity. And there are a lot of issues to be unearthed and unpacked in America. There is no question about it. This is a state, like, the truth of the matter is, and this will make more conservative people uncomfortable. And I'm not trying to throw any side or the other a bone. It's just, if you're going to be even attempt to be objective, I mean, we, from our inception, we have a habit of choosing which of our citizenry has more or less value, inherent value, or dignity. So this isn't just an abortion issue, not in my mind. It's something that's woven into our very beginning of our inception. A deist is not a Christian necessarily, unless they explicitly say, I'm a Christian and I follow Jesus exclusively. To call one a deist, that's great. That's not the same thing. It's just not. And I know we try to make it, I get it, but it's not. And so if you really look at our history, that's in our history, and it's playing itself out. Now we've got this battle with Roe v. Wade being flipped and how people feel about that. But that's a part of, kind of what we're about. And so what I really think is, like, Satan would love to confuse us with a lot of other issues. And there's a lot of other issues in America of how Christians handle it that are so important. But here's the thing, like, we're looking at the story of Esther, right, in our church. And Esther is about a woman who makes the most faithful decision she can possibly make in the midst of nothing but broken options and choices. That's it. It's about God using the broken shards of a destroyed perfect will, intent, and design that sin destroyed, and now kind of putting and piecing together a mosaic in absolute perfection in a way only God can. And so what am I saying? I'm saying that something like Roe v. Wade is about making the most faithful reality out of nothing but broken options. Because the fact of the matter is, there will be abortion moving forward. There will be, death and suffering moving forward. There will be horrible situations and family situations moving forward. You look at the life of Esther. She saved her people for a time, okay, but the Holocaust still came. And that's the thing about evil. It's not going to stop in this life. So the fallacy we have to put to bed is that any one of the choices that we make in this life end anything or stop anything. But we're also not God. So see, we tend to fall into one of two camps. It's no good. And the one camp is, like, I'm making this decision because I think this decision, or I'm behind this. So, if you're pro flipping this thing upside down, which I dig what happened, but it's not going to end hardship, pain, and suffering. I will say that there's no nation that I can think of that, whenever it sacrificed their most innocent amongst them, that eventually isn't judged. That's just a fact. If you don't see the value of something when it is 6 weeks old, 6 pounds, 3 ounces in the womb, you won't see the value of it when it's 6 foot, 3 inches tall. It either has intrinsic value or it doesn't, right? So one issue is, like, we can fall into the fallacy that any one of these things can end or solve. It won't end or solve. But then the other end of the argument with some Christians is actually, it's, to be honest, is the thinking we can play God. We're going to give people these choices, and in making these choices, it's tough, life or death. But here's the situation, and I've had people tell me that. Well, I know of scenarios that were so bad that this is the best option. Well, we're not nihilists. We're not. That's nihilistic Christianity, which is an oxymoron, right? So it's going to come down to trusting God in his word. The world is a terrible place. What is the most faithful thing we can do with the time that we have on this earth, So I say all that to say, all of this that's happened, and I really believe this is really all connected. This is a first step for Christians out there who are really pleased with the decision that's come down. No doubt, our pregnancy centers and the work that's being done and started by faithful followers of Jesus must continue. The other discussions about life and the dignity of life of our citizens and our people outside of the womb, walking around as full grown adults, don't become any less important. In fact, they become just, if not more important now. And all of this stuff is tied together and connected together. Um, and I do think that this is a beautiful a beautiful thing that's happened. I'm amazed that it happened. Thank God that's it, but it's only a first step. We're not in the position to rule the world. We're not God. We don't hold all things in the palm of our hand. The way that I view this is about being faithful as one can be. I think it's a faithful thing that happened. And so I ask for those of you that are on all different sides of it. I hope that your dialogue with one another can be um, grace filled and open minded. There's no doubt there's people listening that would disagree with me. That's fine. Um, but that we can have an open exchange of ideas. Um, you know, so I think that's worth considering. I like what here's Mark Junkins says simply. I hope that at the very least, society focuses more on mutual responsibility for children, both parents assuming responsibility for the consequences of their pleasure. This only makes our community stronger. Children are a blessing. We should treat them as such. Mark, thank you, brother, for chiming in, man. Appreciate that. And that's so true. There's so many facets to this as well. That children really are a gift given to us by God. And that just can't be lost. That's something that's really happening in our country as well. Is that we tend to do things not for children, but to children. We see that in this issue. We see it in our schools. We see it in our society. And so a lot to unpack, but I hope that Christians, guys, I hope you can just at some point flip the page that you got to be proud of the God that you serve. Be bold about the God that you serve. Um, when you're blessed with something that is momentous like this, that you don't need to be ashamed of it. You don't need to gloat and shove it in everybody's face. But at the same time, you should thank God for what happened. Okay. It's a good thing that happened. Um, and we can move forward with dignity and respect. But at the same time, this is a good thing. And where people disagree, and that's okay. But I don't think you should take a disposition of necessarily passivity or guilt, shame, quiet kind of thing. The enemy, the side of culture and society that hates Christianity, hates Christians, hates God, has no issue with abortion whatsoever. They're very firm in their stance, and they're very out and loud about what they think and why they think. And the boldness of God's people is so important. The explicitness of our love and loving our neighbor and loving our enemy is all the more important now. Celebrating life, celebrating children, and unapologetically doing so within the will and the heart and the intent and the design of our God. And that when we come across broken issues that no doubt are out there, that this is why the cross exists. This is not necessarily a fun place to live. It's very broken. There's a good reason why Jesus came down to die for it all. So love you guys. A lot to think about. Mark, thank you, brother, for chiming in. Appreciate you. And I will catch you guys next week. There's no more surprise trips coming. So I'm here. I'll be here next week. Look forward to catching your comments. Love you guys so much. Have a blessed week. Bye.